So tonight we're talking about results and how to handle data. And results should be, this section should be, I don't want to say easy for you, but it should be sort of gratifying for you because when you're here at the results, that means you've passed your proposal, you've done your project, you've done your study, and now you're writing it up. And the results are what happened. So no one can tell you right or wrong. You're the only one who knows. So you're writing what happened. As always, go back and check for your alignment. Double check that if you've used a matrix or something of that nature. So the difference between results, discussion, conclusion, this is how we're wrapping up our manuscript. You remember when we talked about the methods was the plan, what you anticipated was going to happen. The results is what happened. Think of yourself as a reporter. You're simply reporting. This is where, though, you'll want to explain things and you don't. That's the discussion. So you hold off on that explanation. It's simply what happened. No explanation of why. You will have that opportunity in the discussion. You will be able to explain what happened. So you're reporting the main findings. Everything is reported concisely and objectively and in a logical order. So many people, their results are organized by like their research questions or objectives. Some people will take their methods and use that as a template for the results. Like they'll look at what their methods chapter was, because you're going to go back and change the methods to past tense anyway. You're going to change those verbs to the past tense. So you're already in there. You can use that as a template for your results. Or obviously, if you have a template from your department, you're simply going to follow that as a way of organizing your results. You are not hiding anything that happened. I mean, let's say if something completely unexpected happened during your project or during your study, you're going to talk about it. We anticipate unexpected things happening during a study or a project. That's just the nature of the game. And as I've said before, we learn more when things are unexpected. Chocolate chip cookies were a mistake. I know I mention that all the time, but it's important to remember that they were trying to make chocolate cookies and they had run out of cocoa. So they were like, oh, just chop up some chocolate and throw it in there and then it'll melt evenly when they're cooking. And it didn't. But what would we do without chocolate chip cookies, right? Where would we be? So same thing with your study and your project. Something might happen that like, wow, it's really important. Even though it wasn't what you thought was going to happen, it wasn't what you hypothesized, that's okay. Make sure you include it. Every method that you talked about, so all the data that you mentioned that you're collecting and analyzing, all those steps, all those processes, we're going to have a needs assessment, we're going to have an interview. Like those all have to have results in the results section and vice versa. So that's another reason why it's good to consult that methods chapter again to make sure that you are including everything that you had mentioned in the methods, that you're not skipping over something, forgetting something. And then also, if your committee decides, they go back into your methods and they're like, you know what, let's not include that little survey anymore that you had. Make sure you remove that from the results as well. These two chapters really need to line up. And discussion will as well. We'll talk about discussion next week. Results is written in the past tense because everything's already taken place. You run your program, you've done your study, you've built your website, whatever it is. Don't worry about the length. A lot of writers get hung up on the length of their results chapter or section. And it really varies depending on the project. Some projects are going to have a lot of tables and figures. Some projects will have a lot of quotations or verbatims, and that's going to make them longer. So when you have a template from your department and they say your results is this length, they're giving you a ballpark figure. As always, don't think about that when you're drafting. Get your ideas down. And then you can step back and look and, maybe reverse outline or do something else to see if, are you being repetitive? Is there a way to condense it, make it more concise? But don't really worry about that length. So again, results can be chronological order. They can be by your research questions and objectives. There will be maybe some evidence in your results, just like we talked about with the method section, that'll be too large or complicated to have in the body of the text. So instead, it'll be part of an appendix. Typically, appendixes are things that like the reader can wait. Like in the method, you're talking about your interview script. I don't need to read that script right then and there. I know there's a script, and you can put that as appendix, and I can look at that later. Next week, we'll talk a little more about how to handle appendixes. Use bias-free language when you're talking about your results and you're talking about your participants, when you're quoting them. We have a resource in the Writing Center. I just pulled up a small section of it because this is one thing that I find a lot of writers do, and that is they use male and female as nouns, whereas male and female are adjectives. So you wouldn't say, I had 12 females and 2 males. Those are adjectives. I could say I had 12 female nurses and 2 male orderlies or something like that. Then that works as an adjective. Otherwise, I'm going to say I had 12 women and 10 men. So that brings us to, I have a little section here in the results where there's some errors. Take a minute to look at it and see if you can pick up on anything. So in this original one, let me go back to it. Will include, that's future tense. We don't want that. We want past tense, right? We also had said females and males, which I just covered. It should be women and men. And then they didn't have needs assessment. So they said participants completed a needs assessment, an interview, and post-session feedback. And in the results, they said data from the interview and post-session feedback. So again, the methods and the results weren't lining up. They missed something. So those are things to be careful about with revision, not while you're drafting. If you're doing something qualitative, your results will be a little different than a quantitative, but there will be some overlap. There are things that occur in both. But in qualitative results, you're typically looking for themes, just like you did for the lit review. And again, that caveat about not plugging in your data anywhere and being careful about that. You don't want to use AI to help you develop these themes, because if you do that, you're compromising the privacy of your participants. It might make it look like you published it prior. So just be careful of that. But basically, you're gathering, when you're in qualitative, you're gathering your interviews, you're gathering your surveys, whatever it is that you use to get that data, and you're looking for those patterns, those things that are recurring. They might not recur across the board for everyone, but they're common. So here was a dissertation from our university. The dissertation was on neurodiagnostic program director perceptions on low enrollments. You know how we've talked about how perceptions means it's going to be qualitative. They're trying to get a better understanding. So what they did was they had interviewed program directors and asked them some questions. They interviewed them, and then across those interviews, they came up with themes. And these, again, they developed them, just like the lit review. These aren't out there for consumption. They had to come up with them on their own. So the first theme was that there's a lack of visibility of neurodiagnostics as a career field. And within that, they found some sub-themes. Again, just like you might in a literature review. The first sub-theme was low value placed on neurodiagnostics as a career or as a needed educational program. And theme 1B was lack of marketing causes neurodiagnostics to be an unknown option for high school students entering college. And it's very common in the results to label these like theme 1, theme 2, theme 1A, theme 1B. Whereas in the lit review, you didn't typically use those words theme. You didn't usually say theme 1 and theme 2. You just had your themes. This is different because you're coding. So the second theme they had, theme 2, is a lack of clinical. They found when they interviewed these people, these program directors, that many of them said there's a lack of clinical sites for students. Many of them said in theme 3 that there's a lack of standardization. And again, sub-themes of theme 3, that lack of standardization related to standardization of licensure and promotion of the education program versus on-the-job training. And there's probably a few more themes here. There's no rule of how many themes. That's really based on your data that you've collected. And then to support these themes, you're going to bring in quotations from the participants, which we call verbatims when you're talking about research. And just like any other quote, they're going to have a signal phrase that introduces them, the quote, and the citation. But the citation will look a little different than it does when you're citing from research. If we look above this line, this solid line, this is how you do the citations. The first one is a narrative citation, meaning we're citing in the sentence. P2 described the analysis of data as being able to take the largest element, blah, blah, blah. It's most common to use like P1, P2, P3 to mean participant. Your mentor or your advisor might want you to write out participant, and that's up to them. They're the editor of your project. So that would be a discussion you'd have with them. How am I identifying them, and identifying them in an anonymous way? The next one, we're not mentioning them in the sentence at all, but we still have a signal phrase, the most significant strategy described, and then they have their quote or their verbatim, in parentheses P5. No date. You don't need a date. You don't need to say personal communications. None of that. It's not personal communications. It's your data. It's different. This one, there will be no reference on your reference page for any of this. Okay? The only things that appear on your reference page are things that you're citing that other researchers can have access to. They can't access your data. If we look below the line, you want to be careful to avoid drop quotes. And that means quotes are just kind of like shoved in there without a signal phrase. And how I identify them in my own writing is I'll go through and I'll write, and I'll have my verbatims for my participants. And then I'll go out and I'll pull them out. I'll pull out the sentence with the verbatim and read it out of context to make sure it makes sense. So if we look at this top paragraph below the line, and I do the trick I just mentioned, I'm pulling out the verbatim as I have it. It just starts with a quote. It gives you more assignments, but it never tells you what you're doing wrong. So you keep making the same mistakes. If you read it out loud, even read it in your head, it's clear you're missing a signal phrase, right? Because what's it? So that's a nice way of identifying them. Just pulling that verbatim out as you have it in the sentence. So if you have a signal phrase, read the signal phrase. Below, we've added a signal phrase that makes sense. So if I pull this out with the signal phrase, P6 stated that the problem with online assignments is that it gives you more assignments, but this makes sense. This sounds right. And I have the citation too. In this top one, there's no citation. If you have a quotation verbatim that is more than 40 words, it must be a block quotation. Again, when you're drafting, just get your ideas down and then go back and look at those quotations. And in your review tab in Word, there's a word count. So you can like highlight. This is what I do. I highlight the quotation and I go click word count. So it tells me how many words. I'm not going to sit here and count all these words. Back in the day, we had to. But, just it'll tell me. And if it's 40 or more, it has to be a block quotation. You can see two examples here. They look like a block. Everything is indented. Notice there are no quotation marks. And it's different in terms of punctuation. Notice how the period is before the parentheses, before the citations. So if you had in parentheses like P5, The period comes before that, which is different than our other citations. You can make some changes to the quotations. With verbatims, this is often necessary, especially if you're interviewing the person, because when we talk, we stumble over our words, we add a lot of likes and ums and you knows, we backtrack, maybe you ask me a question and I just jump right into it and haven't really identified the subject that we're talking about because I'm answering you. So it is normal to kind of tweak them a little bit, and you need to make your reader aware of what you've done. So in the top one, if you need to eliminate something like a bunch of likes and you knows, the reader doesn't need to read like, they don't need that. You can just put ... and that shows that you remove something. Be very careful not to remove anything that changes the meaning, but ... means there were some words there that you got rid of. Below the brackets is you adding something. So like I said, maybe someone's answering you, like, is it raining where you are? No, it's been pretty good. Like, what does that mean, right? So you'd put like about rain or whatever. No, it's been pretty clear. Brackets show you inserted that word or two words. Those are yours, not the person speaking. So if we look at these three, which quotation is handled correctly? Meaning it has a citation, it has a signal phrase. Would it be A, B, or C? Good. I'm seeing some C's. Excellent. Yeah. The first one, again, I spoke to people who are already in the profession and just listening about the different work. Like the verbatim makes sense, but who said it? There's no citation. It's just kind of plunked in there. The second one, I spoke to people already in profession and just listening about, the different work setting. Again, there's extra words we don't need. The third one has that signal phrase that has the citation, and they're using the ellipsis correctly to show that they did remove some words to make it easier for the reader. So quantitative studies, you're using, statistics, you're explaining whether your hypothesis were supported. You might have some things as appendix here. You're going to include everything, whether it was positive, negative, indifferent, whatever. Every result is going to be included. You will have tables and figures. You could have tables and figures in a qualitative study as well. We have resources in the Writing Center that go into great detail with tables and figures. But basically, they communicate things visually, right, to show the findings in a clear way for the reader. This is a rule of thumb, meaning it's not a hard, fast rule, but it's something to keep in mind. If you only have like 2 or 3 numbers, just write it as part of the text. You don't need a table or a figure in that instance. 4 to 20 numbers are often clearly represented in a table form. There's often not enough there for a clear figure. More than 20 is probably best in a figure. That's a lot for a table. That would be a long table. But again, if you're working with a mentor and they want, vice versa, they want that really long table, then you do what they say. But the principles of tables and figures, most importantly, tables and figures must be understood on their own. So you have to be able to understand it without reading the manuscript. And that might be a way of checking it. Like maybe take a table or a figure and pop into one of our open office hours and be like, hey, can you just look at this? Does it make sense to you? And then, without, if it's one of my office hours and I haven't read anything of yours yet, and then I'm just looking at this table or figure, am I able to understand it? Or stop the mailman or something and say, look at this. You have to have consistent terminology in your table and figure with the rest of your paper. And every table or figure has to be called out or mentioned in the text at least once. You don't have to constantly refer to them each time, but at least once. And so you could say it narratively, like figure 1 shows ... or information on patient participation, parentheses, see table 1. That's the APA format. You have to have that C lowercase SEE. Don't say in the table above or below, because we don't know how things are going to lay out when they're finally, in that final format. The tables and figures can be in your manuscript embedded in the body, or they can be on a separate pages after the reference list. And they can also be part of an appendix. We'll talk about that a little more next week. Again, think about whether the readers need to see that table or figure information right away, in which case it should be embedded there. If it's something that can wait, then it can come after the references. For both tables and figures, use your shading and colors very sparingly, especially with tables. You really don't need colors. And often if there's a lot of colors on a table, it causes the reader to stop and wonder, what am I looking at? Why are all these colors here? This is what a table looks like. There's not a lot of lines. There's not a lot of colors. There's always a table number. If you only have one table in the entire document, that's unusual in a study or a program. But if you only have one, it's just table. Otherwise, it's table 1, 2, 3, etc. Numbered in the order that they're mentioned in the paper. So the first table is table 1. The second one is table 2. The label is bold and the title is italicized, not bold, and in title case. And again, we have a document that goes into this in greater detail. Just make sure that your title is not too vague or too detailed, that a reader, again, can read the title and know what the table's about. We are writing in English, so we are reading a page from left to right and top to bottom. So think about that when you're filling in your data. These two tables have the same exact information. The top one I find confusing because I'm reading from left to right. So I have all these years, and I'm looking up and I'm seeing men and I'm seeing women. But in the bottom one, I see ages and men and women, and in the years across, and I realize, I'm supposed to be comparing men to women. So think about that when you're laying out your data. Again, feel free to pop into an office hour and have us look at your tables, and we can tell you, this is confusing to me. Some tables have notes. There are different kinds of notes. There's a general note, a specific note, and a probability note. I'm not going to go into these in great detail. Again, we do have resources on this, but you would just have note at the bottom in italics with a capital N, and then explain what the note is about. And the note just helps the reader. Some of your tables and figures will need a copyright attribution, which is not a reference or a citation. It looks very different. So again, we have a resource in the Writing Center to help you. This template, you just follow it like your life depends on it. You can also drop into an office hour and say, hey, I think I need a copyright attribution here. How do I do it? And we can help you with that, because it's something that you so that no one's expected to really kind of know it off the top of their head. We also have a resource in the Writing Center about how to literally format the table, meaning how to toggle those columns and rows and things in Word. A lot of people spend a lot of time struggling with that. I don't know how to make this table fit here. I don't know how to, so this goes through how to do that. And again, we can help you. I've had many, many students drop into my office hour and because they're frustrated with their tables, and I help them with that. So tables are data that's filled into cells, whereas figures are images. So I've seen people use them the opposite way. So you just want to make sure you're using those correctly. Figures are images like bar graphs and charts and maps and photographs. So because of that, you want to make sure that your figure is large enough to be legible. Sometimes I see figures where I'm really trying to, I'm up on it, trying to figure out what that's going on. It's kind of blurry. I'm sure you've seen that too. So just be careful. Always follow the rules for numbers and symbols. Think about things like shading and colors again, any kind of citation usage. If you're doing a photograph and there's a person that you can see in the photograph, make sure you have their permission to include it. I had a physical therapy person have her husband take pictures of her, so she could bypass all that nonsense, because it was like her doing the things, doing the interventions. So that's one way to do it. But just make sure that the images are clear, that the labels are clear. Some figures will have a legend or a key, which can be either inside the figure like this, or to the side, or to the bottom, but just allowing the reader to understand like what the colors and the shading mean, and be very careful again about colors and shading, that they make sense, that they're not too close to each other where you can't tell which line is which because the colors are so similar. And really importantly, consider if a table or figure is necessary. I've seen things like this where I'm like, what is this blob? What am I looking at? Wouldn't this be better to just write a sentence in the manuscript that says all participants completed the survey instead of having this? So figures are similar to tables in that they are numbered, excuse me, not lettered. They are numbered. They're numbered in the order they're mentioned. The first one's figure 1. If there's only one, it's just figure. The figure label, like figure 1, figure 2, is bold, left aligned. The title is italicized, title case, left aligned. And you might have notes with your figures as well. So last one, I just want us to look at this table and see if you can notice any errors in this. The title, correct. No colon, excellent. The colors, yeah, right? Doesn't that, you like look at these colors and go, what, am I supposed to do something with? Am I supposed to know something about these colors? Should I be understanding something from them? So this is what it should look like. Yes, it should have table 1, no colon, excellent job. The title should be beneath the label, not at the bottom, and italics in title case, and then no colors. It's fine just like this. Follow those rules of number. Make sure that you're using them correctly in your tables, in your figures, and in your manuscript. And then make sure you're doing things correctly, like your total for your participation, for your participants. If you're talking about your entire sample, that's italicized N, capital N. If you're talking about a subgroup, like let's say we had 58 people, it's capital italicized N equals 58. That's our entire group. Let's say 30 of them were women. That's the subgroup. It would be lowercase italicized N equals 30. So just things like that to be careful of. You know, there's a little results checklist I have here. As I said, we are working on an overall checklist for everyone about how to do programs, studies, and everything. So